the abandoned St. Vincent's Hospital. It was the spring of 2017. I was in the final stages of pledging for a fraternity at college. Our entire pledge class was buzzing with a mix of excitement and nervousness. As a tradition, each class had to participate in a particular rite of passage. It was a kind of initiation activity that everyone had to endure. For us, that meant a midnight trip to an abandoned hospital a few towns over. The rumor was that it had been closed for years. No one really knew why. It was the kind of place that was never talked about, but always seemed to loom over local legends. I'd carpooled with my pledge brothers, though honestly, there were so many of them, I'm not going to list all their names. But the one I spent most of the night with was Marcus. He and I had become pretty close during the pledge process. For the night's adventure, we stuck together. We were joined by a handful of other guys from our group. They were a bunch of eager and adrenaline-pumped freshmen trying to prove their worth. But I was mainly focused on Marcus. We drove out toward the outskirts of town. St. Vincent's Hospital sat in eerie isolation. It was far from the streetlights and the usual hustle of the suburban sprawl. The hospital was next to a large park, so naturally we parked in one of the park's lots. It was just after midnight when we arrived. The sky was clouded over, leaving only a faint glow from the moonlight. We sat in the cars for a few minutes, waiting for everyone to arrive. Once the group had assembled, we started walking down a narrow, winding pathway through the park. The woods were dense here, and the trees hung low with thick branches that almost looked like they were reaching for us. I'd never been in this park at night. Now standing under the canopy of ancient trees, I could see why people said it had a strange energy. It was unsettling. The path veered off to the right and into a small stretch of woods, separating the park from the hospital. I groaned as I felt the cool dampness of the grass soaking into the soles of my shoes. I was wearing white sneakers, Air Force Ones to be specific. This was the worst possible choice. As we slogged through the wet undergrowth, I couldn't help but complain to Marcus. Of all the nights to wear these, why didn't I just throw on my boots? He laughed, clearly less concerned about footwear than me. He offered to help me steady myself when I slipped on a muddy patch. "You'll live," he teased. I could tell he was also trying to shake off the nerves. The hospital loomed ahead now. Its dark skeletal form stood tall against the night. It was surrounded by a sprawling abandoned parking lot. The building, once bustling with life, was now silent. The sight of it, dark, empty, and imposing, was almost surreal. We reached the hospital grounds, stepping cautiously onto the cracked asphalt. The wind howled through the trees. For a moment, the group seemed to hesitate. There was something profoundly creepy about standing on the edge of a place like this. The hospital had once been full of patients, doctors, and staff. Now it was only a hollow shell. Marcus turned to me, eyes wide with excitement. He was clearly less intimidated than I was. "You good?" he asked, nudging me. I nodded. I could feel the unease creeping up my spine. One of the guys in our group led the way. He was a more experienced urban explorer named Chris. He was one of those guys who had been inside every abandoned building in a 100-mile radius. He knew a secret entrance to the hospital. Instead of walking to the front entrance, which we all knew was locked up tight, we made our way to the back. One of the lower windows had been smashed open. We all filed in one by one. We squeezed through the jagged opening into the dark interior. The floor was damp. I felt the squish of moisture seeping into the sides of my shoes. It made me regret my fashion choices even more. The smell of mildew and rotting wood hit us immediately. It was a heavy, musty smell that seemed to cling to the walls and floor. The group was large, about 10 of us, so I wasn't feeling too freaked out at first. There was safety in numbers, plus with the adrenaline kicking in, I wasn't paying too much attention to the eerie creaks and groans of the old building as we made our way through it. We climbed a creaky staircase, our footsteps echoed down the hallway. There was something unsettling about that noise, like we were disturbing the long silence of the place. Chris led the way, guiding us through the decaying hospital. The walls here were mostly untouched by graffiti, which struck me as odd. Places like this usually became canvases for vandals. "Not many people come in through here," Chris explained. His voice was low. "Most people think they have to go through the front. This place is a little too hard to get into the usual way, but if you cut through the park, you avoid the security cameras." Eventually, the group started to splinter. Some of the guys went off down one hallway, others took off in the opposite direction. Marcus and I found ourselves on the second floor. We were walking down a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The rooms were either completely empty or had been ransacked. The remnants of broken medical equipment were scattered on the floor. In one room, we found an old hospital bed still lying there. Its metal frame was rusting. Dusty medical equipment was left behind untouched for years. We were about to leave the room when we heard it. A faint sound, footsteps not from our group, echoed from somewhere down the hall. I turned to Marcus, a cold shiver ran down my spine. We both stepped into the hallway. I peered down the length of it. At the end I saw something, a shadow, moving. It was impossible to make out any details in the dim light. I could tell that someone was standing there just out of clear sight. My heart skipped a beat. "Who's there?" I called out. I stepped forward. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it seemed to turn and step into the room next to it. It vanished into the darkness. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Marcus. He was now standing behind me, just as confused. "There's someone here. We need to go." Marcus looked at me, his expression as serious as mine. "No way, man. Let's head back to the group. Now." We turned quickly and started walking back down the hallway. The sound of our footsteps echoed in the silent building. We were moving faster now. As we approached the main corridor, I suddenly froze. A scream, loud and blood-curdling, pierced the air. It was unmistakable, a woman in agony. It sounded like she was being brutally attacked. My stomach lurched at the sound. I could hear the voices of our pledge brothers ahead. They stopped abruptly. The scream cut through the air like a knife. We broke into a run. I shouted, "Go, now!" We bolted back down the hall toward the stairs. One by one, we scrambled down to the lower level. Our hearts were pounding. I was toward the back of the group now, trying to stay close. I felt like I couldn't move fast enough. When we finally reached the back window we came through, I didn't hesitate. One by one, we crawled back out of the opening, but then... footsteps. Stomping, loud, deliberate, coming from the stairwell behind us. These weren't the footsteps of anyone in our group. I felt a sudden, overwhelming rush of fear. "Go, hurry up!" I screamed at the last guys in line. The rest of us were already out scrambling through the woods toward the cars. I was terrified someone was going to grab my legs, pulling me back into the dark hospital. The seconds felt like hours. Finally, I was out. My heart was racing. We made it back to the parking lot, panting and wide-eyed. Adrenaline was coursing through our veins. When we were all back in the cars trying to catch our breath, I told the group what I had seen. I swear I saw someone in that hallway. That's where the scream came from. There was definitely someone in there with us. Everyone was silent. Their faces were pale as they processed what I had said. The air in the cars was thick with the weight of the unknown. The screeching of the woman's scream echoed in my mind. Needless to say, we all agreed it was time to leave. Fast. As we drove away from St. Vincent's Hospital, none of us spoke. There was nothing more to say. That night left me shaken. To this day, I still wonder what we really encountered in that building. Who was the woman? Who were the people we saw? What was that scream? I don't know. But I do know this. I'm done with urban exploration. The hospital is a place I'll never visit again. The Blackthorn Manor. There was this house near us known as Blackthorn Manor, a name we all heard but never really thought about, until it became a legend in our small town. No one really knew who started calling it that, but after so many years of sitting unfinished, it just stuck. It had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. This looming skeletal structure with broken windows, faded paint, and a yard that looked like it hadn't seen a lawnmower in a decade. It stood at the end of a shady block surrounded by other houses that seemed to be half forgotten. Some looked abandoned, others just unloved. The lawns were overrun with wild grass weeds tangled in the chain-link fences. You could hear the occasional rustling of a stray cat or the distant bark of an unknown dog, but that was about it. It was the kind of neighborhood you wouldn't want to walk through after dark. One evening, my friends and I, Ava, Ben, Emily, and I, found ourselves with nothing to do, just driving around aimlessly, the night dragging on. We stopped at a fast food joint, grabbed some burgers and fries, and just sat in the parking lot trying to think of something to kill the time. Ben, ever the instigator, tossed out the idea of going to Blackthorn Manor. He didn't mean just driving by it, no, he meant actually going inside, seeing what was left of it. He'd always been the daredevil, and I knew if he was in, the rest of us wouldn't back out. Emily and Ava, like always, were on board immediately. I couldn't say no either. Even though I knew it wasn't the smartest idea, the curiosity and the thrill of doing something stupid and reckless pulled me in. We parked a few houses down the street where the glow of a single streetlight barely managed to cut through the darkness. The rest of the block was pitch black, with houses casting long, unnerving shadows. Most of the windows in the neighboring houses were dark. It felt like the whole street was asleep, but there was something off about it, something that felt wrong. We all piled out of the car as quietly as possible, careful not to make any noise that might attract unwanted attention. The air was cold and heavy, thick with the sense that we weren't exactly welcome there. The house ahead of us loomed like a dark, silent giant. Its broken windows stared back at us like eyes, its empty doors gaping wide, waiting for us to cross the threshold. We walked closer, our footsteps muted against the cracked pavement. Every step seemed to echo, but the stillness of the night made it feel like we were the only living things left on Earth. The closer we got, the more I could feel that tension building, like something was watching us from the shadows. We didn't talk much, all of us just absorbing the atmosphere. There was something sinister about this place, something that made me uneasy. Of course, the front door was locked when we tried it, so we circled around the house, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, looking for another way in. It was Ben who found the window. He tried it first, and it slid open with a sharp, shrill creak. Emily, being the smallest of the group, was the first to climb through her body, disappearing into the darkness inside. She quickly unlocked the back door for us, but as I stepped through, I realized something. The door had already been unlocked. That fact sent a shiver down my spine. The place had been abandoned for years. There was no way anyone else should be inside. But here we were, standing in the dark hallway of a house that seemed to have been waiting for us. The smell hit us immediately. It was a mix of old decaying wood mildew and something rancid like rotten cat piss. The smell made my stomach turn, but we pushed forward. The first floor was much more finished than I expected, with large rooms, some with wooden paneling, some with exposed drywall. No furniture, not a single piece. It was like the house was trying to look like a home, but it had forgotten how. We split up, each of us exploring different parts of the house. I made my way up to the second floor, the stairs creaking beneath my feet. It was colder up here. The second floor was less finished, just beams and drywall frames. It felt like the house was incomplete, like it was waiting for something, or someone, to finish what had been started. I could hear the others downstairs laughing and talking, trying to make light of the situation, but the noise grated on me. It felt wrong to laugh in a place like this. I walked through the dark rooms, trying not to touch anything. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the floorboards felt too loud. My mind was racing. What had happened to this house? Why was it left like this? What had gone wrong? After a while, I turned and started to head back downstairs. That's when I ran into Emily in the hallway. "What's upstairs?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shrugged, trying to sound calm, mostly just a lot of framing, nothing exciting. She looked at me, then at the stairs, and without another word, she turned and climbed up. I wandered around the first floor for a while, but there was nothing that caught my interest. The house felt too empty, too still. I was about to head into the basement when I noticed the brown door under the stairs. It stood out against the rest of the house like it had been hidden on purpose. Without thinking, I reached for the handle. The door creaked open and I was hit with the foul odor again, stronger now, like it had been waiting for me. I couldn't breathe properly as I descended the steps, my flashlight flickering as I went deeper into the darkness. The basement was a mess. The concrete floor was stained with something dark, almost rust-colored like dried blood. I tried to tell myself it was just paint, but something about it felt off. I scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. A small wooden chair and a table in the corner. A single object sitting on top of it, an old, worn Bible. I moved toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no reason for this book to be here, none. I was about to pick it up when I heard footsteps from above. My pulse quickened and I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey guys, come check this out." But there was no answer. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I turned around, half expecting to see one of the others walking down the stairs, but when I looked back, I froze. There, in the corner of the basement, was a woman sitting against the wall. Her hair was long and tangled, covering most of her face. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with cold, lifeless eyes. I took a step back, my mind racing. The air felt heavier now. The basement seemed to close in on me. Who are you?" I stammered, but my voice cracked, and I couldn't say anything more. Then I heard it. A scream. It came from upstairs. Emily, Ben, Ava. I couldn't tell who it was, but it was unmistakable. A scream of pure terror. Without thinking, I bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding so loud I thought I would explode. As I reached the top, I saw them, Emily and Ava running toward the back door, fear in their eyes. Ben was already outside shouting for us to hurry. I didn't know what they had seen, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. We ran to the car, not stopping until we were inside, locked up tight. The engine roared to life and Ben slammed his foot on the gas, tearing down the street. As we drove away, I turned to them, breathless. "What happened? What did you guys see?" Everyone was talking over each other, too frantic to make sense. But finally, Emily spoke up. There were two men in one of the rooms. We didn't see their faces, but we saw them standing there. They were watching us. They didn't move. And there were things, dark shapes on the floor. We didn't have time to see what they were, but they were wrong. I glanced at her, my blood running cold. You didn't get a look at their faces? No, we couldn't, but they were tall, bigger than normal men. And there was something about them that felt off. We had to get out of there. We all fell silent. The drive felt endless. I kept seeing her face, the woman in the basement, those cold, dead eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that Blackthorn Manor had been waiting for us like it knew we'd come. I don't live in that town anymore. I don't know what happened to Blackthorn Manor. Last time I checked, it was still standing unfinished, a dark shadow against the horizon. But something tells me it's never really going to be finished. And maybe it never should be. The mansion. My friends and I live in what you might call the epitome of suburban bliss. Picture the kind of neighborhood that's quiet, peaceful, and full of pristine, well-maintained houses. Every lawn trimmed to perfection. Towering trees lining the streets. And nothing out of the ordinary, really. The kind of place where nothing dangerous should ever happen, or so you'd think. But I'll never forget the summer night that proved otherwise. A few years ago, my friend Dylan and I were your typical bored teenagers. We lived on the same street, and after school, we'd meet up to hang out. Usually getting into some kind of trouble. Nothing major, just typical teenage mischief. Looking back, I don't know if it was our way of rebelling against the mundane life around us, or just the boredom that came with living in such a quiet place. Most days there wasn't much to do unless we wanted to drive 20 minutes over to the next town, so we made our own fun. One of the things we liked to do was explore Blackthorn Mansion, an old creepy house at the top of a hill just outside our neighborhood. The mansion had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. To be honest, it wasn't all that special except for the fact that it was massive and totally derelict. Every kid in town had been inside at some point, and there wasn't much to see. The rooms were empty, stripped of anything valuable, and the walls were covered in layers of spray paint from other bored teens like us. But the most unsettling part? The mansion sat right next to an enormous, overgrown cemetery. It added an eerie feeling to the whole place. For Dylan and me, Blackthorn Mansion became our default hangout spot. When we had nothing else to do, we'd go in and spray paint the walls. Or just climb to the roof and chill sipping beers and talking about whatever was on our minds. That night, though, things were about to take a turn for the worse. It was around 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, the kind of night where everything feels extra quiet. Dylan and I had been blown off by some girls we were supposed to meet up with, and we were more than a little irritated. So instead of just sulking, we figured we'd head up to the mansion and throw rocks at the windows. Classic. Stupid but classic. Neither of us were exactly sober, but we didn't care. We weren't going to drive, so we decided to walk. After a long 20-minute trek, we finally made it to the hill where the mansion stood towering and dark against the night sky. Vines hung down from its crumbling walls. The windows were shattered sharp edges poking out like jagged teeth. The roof with its twisted spires loomed above us, cast long shadows in the dim light from the nearby street lamps. The whole place had a sinister, abandoned feel to it. Without saying much, Dylan picked up a rock and tossed it at one of the fourth-floor windows. The glass shattered with a loud crash. It echoed through the stillness of the night. I grinned my frustration with the night dissipating for a second and grabbed my own rock. I threw it with force and it broke through one of the second-floor windows. The sound of the glass breaking made my heart race, but there was something else that caught my eye. Above the shattered windows, there was a tiny attic window on the very top floor. Dylan dared me to hit it. I missed several times, but I couldn't resist. Frustrated, I finally let the rock fly one last time, and it shattered the glass with a satisfying crash. For a moment, we stood there silently taking in the chaos we had just caused. The sounds of the shattering glass still ringing in our ears, we both felt a sense of accomplishment. That is until something strange happened. I was still staring at the broken attic window when I saw something dark moving. I blinked confused. Then, before I could process what I had seen, a rock came flying out of the shattered window. It landed in front of us with a soft thud right on the gravel path. Dylan and I stood there frozen. The rock that had just landed in front of us looked familiar. It had the same rough texture and, wait for it, a small Z-shaped imprint on one of the faces. The exact same rock Dylan had just thrown. Did you I asked, my voice trailing off. Dylan was staring at it too, equally bewildered. We exchanged a confused glance, and for a second, a nervous chill ran down my spine. Who else would be throwing rocks at the same time? At first, we tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just some other kids messing with us. It wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility. The idea of some teenagers playing pranks on us actually made me feel a little better. So we grinned and decided to sneak up on them. We moved stealthily toward the front door, dodging thick vines hanging from the pillars. The door was slightly ajar like it always was. It had been so long since the mansion's hinges had worked properly that it didn't close all the way anymore. We slipped inside. The old floorboards creaked under our feet. The smell of mildew and rot filled the air as we made our way up the stairs. We tried to be as quiet as possible. With every step, the wood groaned and shifted beneath us. By the time we reached the 4th floor, we had already made our way through half of the house. The whole place was like a maze of dilapidated rooms. There was one area we had never explored, the very top floor. We had never been up there before. Dylan led the way and I followed closely behind. My heart thudded in my chest. The staircase led us to a small wooden door which we guessed was the attic. Dylan put a hand on the doorknob and looked back at me. I nodded, signaling that I was ready. I wasn't exactly thrilled to be heading up there. Without wasting any time, he flung the door open. The first thing that hit us was the smell. It was disgusting, like death. Like something had been rotting in there for years. I instinctively took a step back. Dylan, covering his nose, entered the room anyway. Reluctantly, I followed. The sight was even worse than the smell. In the center of the room was a large white pentagram painted on the floor. Candles sat around it, unlit but still fresh, as if someone had just placed them there. There was a closet in the corner, and the smell seemed to be coming from that. My stomach turned. I was ready to leave. "Let's get out of here," I whispered. But just as I turned to head back, I saw it. At the top of the staircase, standing in the shadows, were 2 figures. Cloaked in black, their faces hidden in the darkness, they were just staring at us. My heart skipped a beat, and I cursed under my breath. Before I could react, we heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Someone else was coming. We didn't have time to think. "Dude, we need to go," Dylan shouted. I spun around to find him halfway out the shattered window already on the roof. Without hesitation, I followed, scrambling out onto the roof. The door to the attic crashed open behind us. The roof was pitch black and the edges were crumbling. One wrong move and we'd fall straight to the ground below. We sprinted across the roof, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We reached the hatch that led to the roof's entrance. Dylan tried to open it, but it was locked from the inside. Then from somewhere in the distance, we heard a voice. A booming, deep voice that sent a chill through my bones. "They went that way," the voice bellowed. Without thinking, I stomped on the hatch with all my might. The door gave way with a loud crash. It was enough to alert anyone inside the mansion that we were there. My foot slipped and I tumbled into the hole. I barely caught myself on the ladder. My leg throbbed, but I had no time to worry about it. "Go, go!" Dylan screamed, his face filled with panic. I scrambled down the ladder, ignoring the pain in my leg. We sprinted down the stairs, bursting through the back door, and leaped over the fence into the cemetery. The cold night air bit at our skin. Dylan seemed fine, actually, laughing. I was barely holding it together. My heart was pounding in my chest. I never thought hiding behind a gravestone in a cemetery could feel so safe. We kept a watchful eye on the mansion, expecting someone to follow us. When we thought the coast was clear, we saw them. 4 or 5 cloaked figures circling the property, searching under bushes and trees, frantically looking for us. I didn't know who they were or what they were doing, but I knew one thing for sure: we weren't sticking around to find out. We slipped through the back fence and haven't been back to Blackthorn Mansion since.